following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the August 16th, 2012 Planning and Development Committee meeting. I'm Don Frantz. To my left is Council Member Mayor Pro Tem Gale Adcock. To my right is Mayor Weinbrecht. And to his right is Town Manager Ben Shiver. We have one item on today's consent agenda. Does anybody have any?
No need to pull it from me.
Okay. All right. That item is to reduce appropriations to the PR 1118 NC 55 Trail Connection Project, and that will go to the next Town Council meeting on consent. Up for discussion, first item on the agenda is the Copperleaf Reserve Subdivision 12-SB-001, request of waiver, and we'll hear from Mr. Bailey of our staff.
Good evening, Council. Copperleaf Reserve Subdivision is a 25-lot subdivision located along Morrisville Parkway. The developer has made a request for two things as part of this, what would otherwise be a staff-approved subdivision plan. One is that they receive relief from extending the reclaimed water line, which is about a mile from their site. They would still do the internal reclaimed lines and have all the second meters and those types of things. They would just not make this off-site extension, and that's their first request. Their second request is for assistance with a very short easement to get sanitary sewer service to this property. There's a sewer line just about 30 feet off the property line, but our Town of Cary easement doesn't abut the property line, so they would need a small extension to actually make that connection. They've made some efforts to obtain that easement and have been unsuccessful. We would require them to do a few more things before the town would begin our process, which would be after it's turned over to the town, we would make our normal efforts through our normal processes to purchase the easement. And if for some reason we were unable to reach agreement with the property owner, we would bring a separate action back to you for consideration of use of eminent domain if needed. Staff recommends in favor of both the waiver and the assistance of the easement acquisition.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
I just want to go in, I'm sorry, I hope you were, go into a little the interior work that he's going to do now. So he's going to run all the lines, and in the future, when our lines run in front of the subdivision, they can or they will be required to hook up.
Yeah, the town would actually hook them up.
Okay, so the town hooks them up.
Or whoever did that new line, which would likely be the town in this case, we would make a connection to that piece, that main line that's stubbed out at the street, and it would automatically be converted.
And will they have separate meters? Do
Yes.
we do separate meters? So in the initial installation, they'll have the separate meters?
Yes, everything internally in the subdivision will be built. There'll be a separate pipeline, separate meters, separate connections to all the irrigation systems. All of it will meet the reclaim standards, the purple pipe, and all the notices, and any requirements would be met. And we would just charge it temporarily out by the road with a connection over to the potable. But later, when that line comes by, the reclaim comes by that area, we would remove that potable connection and connect up.
Okay, I'm good with the staff recommendation.
I am too. I just had a question, Mr. Bailey, for those folks watching at home. If you would just give us the high-level Cliff Notes version of the town's typical easement acquisition procedure.
Okay. Normally, when the town gets involved in a property acquisition, we first of all make contact with the property owner, make them aware that we're considering a project on their property. That's already happened in this case. Then we would begin to determine value on that property for the area that we are considering. Most frequently, we do that with an appraisal by an independent appraiser, certified appraiser. Then we take that property value that's considered in the appraisal, and we make offer to the property owner based on that. And then listen to any concerns or issues the property owner may have that may not have been dealt with in an appraisal. If we hear of some of those that we agree with, then we frequently will adjust the value, maybe go back to our appraisal, ask them to reconsider it, or maybe just make some adjustments. And then we would continue that negotiation until we really either came to agreement on a value or were unable to come to agreement. And then we would ultimately, notify them that we may move on to the next level for obtaining the property. And then it would follow that whole process that I think you are familiar with, where we bring a resolution of condemnation to council. And if council approves that condemnation resolution, there's some title work we do, some notice we do. We have to post deposit with the clerk of courts the value of the property as we've determined through that process I described earlier. And then from there, the property owner can withdraw those funds from the clerk of courts, and they can either settle at that value, or if they choose, they can continue to negotiate and use the legal system to look for some adjustment in that value based on the legal process. We would obtain property, title to the property at that 30-day period after all the notice has been provided and that deposit's been made.
So a really deliberative process, and that notice, if we had to use eminent domain, it would come back to council.
It will come back to town council for separate action, and we'll let you know all the details if you'd like to know about what we have experienced with this particular property. If we get to that, we're hopeful we'll be able to settle that, of course.
As are we. I support the staff recommendation as well.
So do I. So this will move forward on consent. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Next on our agenda is report from the Shale Gas Development Task Force, and we'll hear from Mr. Steve Brown.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
What I'm bringing you this evening is the final report of the Shale Gas Development Task Force. I'd like to start out by putting the rest of the report in context. If you look at Figure 1 on the staff report, it shows a map, and the map has a large green area. It's a cross-section across the most of the state. This is an area of geological formation known as the Triassic Basin, and it is divided into several sub-basins. The middle part of that is called the Sanford Sub-Basin. That's the area in which recoverable shale gas has been identified. All the other areas, there has been no discovery of recoverable gas. To the north of that is what's called the Durham Sub-Basin, and Cary is in the Durham Sub-Basin. So I just wanted to give that context. If you look at Figure 2, it actually shows a map of Cary's corporate limits overlaid on that Durham Sub-Basin. So I just thought that would be helpful to provide that context for the rest of this report.
So they have not identified any shale gas?
Right, there has been no shale gas identified, and the U.S. Geological Survey has been looking for it. So at this time, nobody knows of any gas in the Durham Sub-Basin. You'll recall back in December that Council directed staff to investigate the pros and cons of shale gas development within Cary and to report back to Council with suggested actions that Cary may take in the event that gas was discovered and developed in this area. So the task force consisted of several staff, as well as members of the Environmental Advisory Board and the former Economic Development Commission. So a total of 7 citizens provided a lot of input to this final report. In July of this year, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a new law that does allow further development of shale gas resources in North Carolina. This new law creates a regulatory framework for the state of North Carolina to further study the issue and to develop the just the whole wide range of rules and regulations that would be required to effectively oversee this new industry. Part of this law created a North Carolina Mining and Energy Commission, and this commission is tasked with leading this process with the goal of having a program fully in place by October 2014, so a little more than 2 years from now. There are local government representatives on that commission, mostly from the area down in the Sanford subbasin, I believe from Moore County and the city of Sanford, represented specifically on that commission. The commission is specifically tasked with working in conjunction with numerous agencies and interest groups, including the North Carolina League of Municipalities, North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, to determine how best to address local government regulation of oil and gas activities that may occur within their jurisdictions. Specifically, the law says also that the no gas extraction, permitting of gas extraction is allowed in North Carolina until the legislature takes further action. So presumably they want to be satisfied that there is a good, solid regulatory program in place before any of this work could occur. So in the task force's study of the issue, it's a very lengthy staff report, lots of details, so I'll just try to summarize. We identified 4 main areas of concern for the town, and they're economic development, environmental protection, direct impacts to town-provided services, as well as impacts on citizens' quality of life. So as we discussed it, things tended to fall into these 4 categories. And the staff report has a lot of discussion on each of those, pros and cons, and we termed it potential benefits, potential risks. And there's a lot of trade-offs within each issue. The staff report and its attachments do include just a considerable amount of detail, reports, links to just numerous government agency reports and everything. But to summarize, the task force recommends that staff follow this upcoming rulemaking process as it plays itself out over the next year or two, paying particular attention to the town's interest in a number of key areas in the event oil and gas development was to occur within our area and jurisdiction. These areas that we want to pay particular attention to would be protecting our water supply from contamination, protecting air quality in the region, protecting our public infrastructure, especially water, sewer, roads that could be impacted by effects of this industry if it did occur here. Also identifying funding sources to cover potential impacts to things like to municipal services such as fire and rescue, police, inspections, permitting, and any new programs that might be deemed necessary to effectively address anything that occurred in our jurisdiction. And also, last but not least, effective land use planning and zoning authority to protect property development and quality of life within Cary. So staff is going to monitor and participate in these upcoming processes. You gave us clear direction in your legislative agenda last year, and we did have some success pursuing that agenda with the legislature through the last session in development of this law. So we recommend that Council accept this staff report as the task force's final report on this topic, and we will continue to monitor these issues and report back as needed. I'd be remiss if I didn't give special thanks to the 7 citizens who helped us with this. Their expertise and deep interest in the town of Cary were very helpful in providing this report. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Questions or comments?
Yes. I agree with the staff recommendations and also echo your comments. Appreciate the work of the task force. My questions have to do with zoning. Assuming there is legislative authority or legislative approval to allow fracking, what zoning would that fall under, or would we be required to create a new zoning to allow that?
Right, we had some planning department representatives on the task force, and it's only permitted as a special use within a very narrow range of industrial uses. There is a provision for resource extraction as a special use. That's the only way it's permitted at this time.
So special use, if I remember correctly, the burden is on the applicant to prove that it meets the 7 criteria, I think it's 7 criteria, before it can be approved. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay.
I'd defer to planning staff for more detail.
Okay. That's correct.
It's quasi-judicial. Yeah.
I guess as we go forward, I want to assure people that even if the legislature says, yeah, fracking can occur, that we still have some authority and some decision-making in this process. If we feel that it's endangering our citizens, our infrastructure, or whatever, we can still make that call. And I think that's an important distinction to make, and that's why I brought this up.
Thanks. First of all, I also support the staff recommendation. I think it's a very well-written report, extremely well organized given the amount of information you need to put in there. And I think it shows a true understanding of Cary's role in regard to other municipalities as well as the state. But I had a suggestion about what would make the report stronger, and I was just curious as to whether y'all would support this. You know, as I look at this, I know that we will use the recommendations going forward, but I would assume that we would also look back to the background as this issue moves forward in 5 years from now. When we look back at this report, we'd like to be able to trace back the references that were used, the sources or the facts presented. I think in that case, they really ought to be cited, either each, and I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean, either through a link each time a study or report is referenced, and or a bibliography at the end. I actually think both are better because you're looking for different things. You're looking for, you know, when the links are embedded in the report, you don't really know how many references you have, but if you have a bibliography at the end, you can see, well, there were 50, but look how old some of them are, that kind of thing. So here are just some examples. Under the economic development paragraphs, it references an LRC report, the New York Mercantile Exchange, Henry Hub, the Department of Commerce report, the DENA report, but, you know, they put out a lot of reports, so what year and what quarter and that kind of thing. I think a link to those reports would really help us later. And if these exist somewhere else, Steve, and I missed it, just stop me now.
Several of
and
those
tell
reports
me.
are linked in the staff report the first time that they're referenced.
A few are, but I don't think they all are.
They all are not.
Okay.
Right?
So let me just give you a few other examples. And under environmental concerns, there's a Duke University study referenced. And then on the 5th line of that paragraph, it talks about a long list, and it puts in parens CDC, Komen, University of Texas Southwest Medical Center. And I don't see any link to any sources for that. So if I was going to go back and look at this in 3 to 5 years, I'd go, which Komen report? Which CDC report? And I'd want to be able to reference that. Under air quality, it talks about the EPA's new rules, and this section of the rules is not referenced. It talks about the report from the U.S. Energy Information Agency. I didn't see a link to that or a source for that. Under municipal government services in the 4th paragraph, on the 2nd line, it talks about experience in other states. I think that could be really helpful to us later to have a link to which states and what experiences we're talking about, rather than just that summarization in that sentence. And under citizen impacts, it talks about respected health authorities disagree, and it goes on to talk about the possibility of causes of cancer. I'd really like to know which respected health authorities and what their respective opinions were. I just think as we look back on this, it's not going to be filed on a shelf or in a server somewhere. This is really a living, breathing document that will inform those recommendations as we go forward. So that's just my suggestion. You don't have to take it, but I just think it would make it a stronger report in those cases where those sources are not identified.
How doable is that?
We actually discussed that at great length in the task force, especially in our last couple meetings, and we could have developed a bibliography that was almost as long as the staff report.
Oh, I figured it was.
A great volume. All that information is in it will be in the project, records. We even thought about attaching an appendix to the staff report that had a list that summarized the staff report, and the appendix was as long as the staff report. So we were just trying to provide a concise report. We linked the major reports. We sifted through tremendous volumes of information that ranged everywhere from official government reports to academic works to op-ed pieces, and so we had to filter out the opinion and other things. And when we found medical journals that conflicted each other and specifically pointed to each other as being inaccurate. So it was...
Which is why
it's
you
hard
want
to
your
capture
sources.
all that. Right, it's hard to capture all that information in a concise way. We could develop a bibliography or a list of those things. It would be quite long.
Well, and I'm not trying to create more work for the staff or the citizens, because I think you've done a yeoman's job, I really do. But I think about the next council that pulls this report and goes, okay, so now in 2016, the thought is X. Well, what were we thinking in 2012? And what did we base that opinion on? And so if you already have the information, whatever way is easier to do it, but yet it's retrievable, is what I would just speak to. So that's just a suggestion, doesn't have to be taken.
Makes sense to me.
I tend to agree with you. However,
I don't want it part of the report. I just want it back there.
Gotcha, gotcha. I like that some of the major sources of information are linked, and maybe not so much all the little notes and stuff here and there. I would like something simple. If I clicked on a bibliography and this massive page came up and I had to keep scrolling, I think that would be somewhat intimidating, and I don't know who would have the time to actually click through all the links, but I hear where you're coming from, and I tend to agree with why. So,
particularly in those sentences where it says respected, what did I say? Respected health authorities disagree, and then there's just a summary. I mean, you know.
but at the same time, at this point in time, we have a lot of respected authorities that are disagreeing on this topic.
Right. I'd just like to know who they are.
It's a lot.
Was it 12? I mean, but did the committee look at 12? Did they look at 20? Did they look at 200? You know, that kind of thing. But anyway, it's just a suggestion, but I totally support the conclusions that have been drawn about the best way for Cary to proceed, and that this should go on consent and be accepted as the final report, and the committee be disbanded because their work is finished.
Do you
So it's
foresee a problem putting or any?
We can
excessive
assemble,
time?
we can try to assemble all the, be a lot of hyperlinks to web sources and other documents. We could assemble that into a single document and,
Or-
make that
Or if it's easier for y'all, you know, when you cite an opinion or a fact, and then and it's a live link that takes you to that information, I mean, those embedded links may actually be easier for you. Whatever's easier for you is okay with me. I just know, that could be sources of disagreement. and
No,
that
I mean,
kind
you're
of-
absolutely right when you talk about a future council or even us going back 5-6 years,
Well, when you draw
It's a good memory refresher.
Well, and when you draw conclusions, you want to know, what did you base those on? Yeah.
I would also echo my colleagues' comments and Mr. Brown's, and thanking the citizen task force members, both from the Economic Development Commission and Environmental Advisory Board. I know they had some good discussion on this item, and as kind of nationally, we're having a good discussion on this topic, but I am confident that Cary will continue to work with our legislators and all the regulatory agencies and such, and ensure that Cary's interests are represented. You know, Cary, we have a reputation of leading the state in environmental protection, and I do not see us dropping the ball on this one. I'm sure we'll be right there in there with them, help them ensure that Cary continues to stay a very wonderful, environmentally friendly place to live. And we all want clean water and clean air, and I'm sure we'll work to get it. I'm pleased by a lot of the stuff I've seen in the report, and this still has a long ways to go before anybody ever starts drilling in the ground here in North Carolina. So thank you all very much for your work on this, and unless I'm mistaken, this will go on consent. All right. Thank you much, Mr. Brown. Seeing no other business before us, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.